equal to its. Alright, sorry for that. So now we're on the Anarchist, the final Goblin class. Perhaps the most poorly designed, um, most random, and random by design. We decided that what we wanted to do was create a class that was the RNG class. Anyone who liked RNG in games could come to this class, and every single ability would be RNG. Which was interesting, I think, as a conceit for a class, but I don't know if actually I do know. I do know that it actually didn't work. We did it wrong.
Scratch that. This is terrible.
This is terrible. I think we were taking like the Chaos Knight as our inspiration, because we were like, yeah, I don't like how much RNG there is, and blah blah blah. And it's like, well, the Chaos Knight's an interesting sort of character. You play Dota, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's like an interesting character that revolves around RNG, and it's not impactful in too many ways. And then we were like, but what if we skewed it out and made it way RNG in all these different directions?
Everyone will love it.
So what we came up with was a class where after every single ability you rolled a d6, and this was back when we were doing this on paper before it was actually like being programmed as a game. So you would be rolling d6s pseudo frequently, but like every ability, even if the ability had nothing to do with rolling a d6, you would roll a d6. Um, and we thought it would be funny because in the first few abilities, when you roll a d6, nothing happens. You're just rolling a d6
Why am I doing this?
because the ability tells you to. And then later on in the kit, it would be revealed that you're getting something from rolling all these d6s, and it's this cool fireworks moment. This is the thing I've been describing to you, like building up into this meaning that's amazing. And of course, we know now that that's a terrible way to design.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll read through and see if there are anything there are any abilities worth really. Fickle Disobedience is interesting because you roll a d6 and it costs however much mana was on the d6, and it targets however many enemies were on the d6. And then, for whatever reason, it reduces all the damage done by whatever number was on the d6 as well. So, like, if you were going to attack 6 enemies, yes, it would reduce the damage that you would deal by 6. Which could mean that you attack 6 enemies, deal the damage to every single one of them, and only deal, like, nothing, or 1 damage. So. I don't even want to read through this, it's terrible. There's an ability that reduces the amount of damage dealt to you by enemies with bows and staves equipped. There's no reason for that to be there. Although it does have a cool name, and the lore behind it interesting. The biggest, I was going to use another word that would kill children. Uh, the most ramshackle design, perhaps the worst designed ability in the kit, is Into the Pit, which could have been really interesting. But basically, the way it would work is whenever you roll an even number on a d6, something cool happens. Whenever you roll an odd number on a d6, something on the other spectrum of cool happens, like the inverse side. And then whenever you roll a 6, it's a critical. Um, of course, the issue being that like that makes evens less likely to occur, and the effects have to be interesting and varied and balanced on their own. And instead of being any of those, we just amplified your damage and amplified the damage that you took, or reduced your damage and reduced the damage that you took. And so we were still thinking in terms of damage as being something that's very interesting to people. Damage is only interesting in that it allows you to accomplish the objective of killing people. much more interested about how you deal the damage rather than the damage that you deal generally in a game. For those watching, you don't really need an explanation, I guess, but when you're playing Call of Duty and you kill someone a revolver, that generally feels better than if you hit them with like the last flip of an SMG on accident. Like, yeah, it feels cool to get that kill out of nowhere and you weren't expecting it, but the skill feeling of nailing a person from half across the map with a revolver is nice. Damn, I did that damage and it killed them. And you get the skill feedback. It wasn't the damage itself. It wasn't killing the enemy that made you feel as good as how you killed the enemy. And that's generally, I think, why I enjoy as a player as a sniper games like in FPSs, because it's such a skill. It makes it much more skill based, I think. Not that sniping is always the most skill involved. I feel like it probably should be. It's not. I know that a lot of people in TF2 who use snipers are just ridiculous.
Yeah, a little bit too good.
Yeah.
There's people in TF2 that are too good with every class.
Too good with any class.
That's true.
Fucking, the rocket jumping is absurd. People get way too good at rocket jumping.
Yeah.
The rest of these sort of revolve around damage and rolling d6s. And then the last ability, I think, is the only one that will keep the concept of as the ultimate, because I really like the concept. I do think that when we go back through and we work on the Anarchist, that we're going to keep the theme of rolling d6s, because that's going to break the fourth wall in a really interesting way. Like, you'll actually see the d6 rolling physically on the screen, something like that.
Huh.
If we keep it referential, then we can break the fourth wall and say like, oh, we're an RPG, we're rolling d6s, this is cool, and allude to the fact that everything is RNG, and sort of create this Goblin storyline where maybe everything isn't taking itself quite as seriously, and you can do interesting things like be in the middle of a quest line somewhere, and then like code starts blipping up on the screen. You slowly walk into an area that hasn't been coded, and you're like, and then an option hovers on your screen. And it's like in a Windows error window, and it says roll a d6, okay, or cancel. I think that's really the only place where we'd be able to do something like that.
Probably.
Fever dream mode.
Yeah. But anyway, Insurrection, which is the rank 10, I think is the only ability where we'll have 6 options for what it does. And we'll have them all just be really good, equally as good as any of the other options. Well, actually, we'll have the first option be slightly less powerful than the second option, all the way to the 6th option, which should be really good. That'll be the culmination of all of our roll d6 interesting things. Or maybe we don't want to do it that way, and what we've learned from all of this is that you can't make a full RNG class interesting, but I think that's less likely than just that we had no idea what. And perhaps still have very little idea of what we're doing when it comes to RNG. RNG is like probably one of the scariest things in design for me. To do it well, it's really difficult. Look at, if you play Hearthstone at all, you can look at that as like a reference. Because in Hearthstone, the most recent set that they released, Goblins versus Gnomes, had like not half of its cards, like maybe a quarter of its card pool were RNG cards, or had some form of RNG. And while interesting, while each of those cards were interesting in their own right, and the RNG was generally somewhat well implemented, when it comes to one of the game modes, which is Arena, which is drafting, one of the things that makes it so that you can keep on drafting is being able to consistently play well. And unfortunately, since the card pool became more diverse with more options and more of them were RNG, the likelihood of you having to choose RNG cards increased, which of course is anti-consistency. Some games you'll win by a lot, and some games you'll lose just because the RNG went wrong. And so what they did, maybe unwittingly or maybe on purpose, and I'd like to think unwittingly, because if they were doing it on purpose, then it means that you have to pay more money for their game. Personally, I harbor doubts about how unintentional it was. What they ended up doing was they made it so that newer players and players who are less experienced, um, and even fairly good players who who are more likely to pick more RNG cards will have a more difficult time doing well enough in Arena to play the game for free.
Huh. Hmm.
I was thinking about doing like a write up about it, like a study sort of thing, but then I realized that I just don't care enough. I have
Perfect.
other things I need to be doing,
Like this.
like this. Yeah, but it is really like it is really interesting. You don't think of anyone releasing like an RNG expansion to their game, but it just so happens that with Hearthstone, releasing an RNG expansion enabled them to increase their bottom line. And it just seems like a little bit too convenient.
A plus marketing.
Yeah. It's very cool, very interesting that you could do that and create something like that. Have such a sweeping change over the player base, but at the same time, great power comes Blizzard. Um, so do we have any viewers, or have they all left?
We had three at one point. We got one.
No one was speaking.
Ooh.
So
I'm not counted in that three, am I?
probably a lot of people from our design team, or some people from the design team.
The most I saw was three.
Okay, so that's the goblins. I know we didn't go through exhaustively and look at each one, but as I went through, I realized more and more perhaps what we were learning was decreasing. Um, in terms of lessons from this, I think we've gone over all of them. Perhaps the greatest lesson is just that we had no idea what we were doing in terms of where to put a rank 1 10.
Right.
Um, well, actually, maybe we knew how to do that, but everything in between was really, really, really. And what's sad, actually, what you'll probably notice as we go through and look at the others, not today, but some other day, is that the goblins were the second to last that we ran through about 2 years ago, or however long ago it was. The Iotls were the last, and we thought at the time that the Iotls were the best ones that we'd done. So what that says about the goblins and everything else that came before them.
Speaks for itself.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, unfortunately, I went through and I think I deleted two of the classes from the Wood Elves, so we might not even be able to see the abilities that were there.
How many classes were there?
Four, four for each race, but
Yeah. Well, let's see. Yeah, one of them is just it's got the name and it's got the space for it.
yeah, we added in
There.
we got rid of the abilities and added in two more classes because when we first started designing, um, we had this idea that each race would have two. It would have four classes, but the two of the classes on either side would be part of like one subtree, kind of like there would be this warrior side of the the race, and there would be this caster side of the race, and then both trees. There'd be two trees for caster and two trees for warrior, and they'd be like opposite sides of the same coin.
Right.
And that's how we started doing it. But what we realized as we went through was that the design space for those sides of the same coin became very limited very quickly. So you could say a lot of things about someone who's protecting a forest as a wood elf with one kit, but if you tried to do it again, you were saying less and less